Hello, everyone. Welcome back to dinanddaf. This is Elana Stein Hain. Today, we are going to talk about the question of whether Tum'ah, ritual impurity, is physical or symbolic. This is a question in law in general. How much of law is supposed to be representing what is true out there in the world, and how much is law supposed to be creating things that are symbolically significant, but you can't touch them. You can't feel them, right? Think about the difference between, you know, creating a fact on the ground, something that actually exists, and using a legal fiction to say it's as though it exists, right? That's more symbolic thinking than it is actually trying to reflect what's out there. And the question is definitely asked about that when it comes to Tum'ah and Tara. And in this week's daf, we have on Chullin Ayin Aleph, Amud Aleph 71a, we have a concept called Tum'ah Ritzutza. If you have impurity stuffed into a tight space, Boka'at ve'ola ad larakia, it breaks forth and ascends up to heaven. That certainly sounds like water gushing forth or air popping a balloon. It sounds like something incredibly physical. And so I want to actually ask ourselves, is that completely true of what Tum'ah is? And just what does it tell us about Halakha and law and Tum'ah and all the things? So I want to give you another example where the where Chazal, and I'm specifically going to move away from Gemara and go back to Mishnah. I'm going to go back to Tannaitic literature. I want to go back earlier to the beginnings of these conversation and go to the Mishnah in Ohalot, which maybe Ohalot means tents, right? It might be really ahilut, tenting, because what we're talking about is deceit corpses in a space that is covered in some way. By what we call halachically a tent, but it doesn't literally have to be a tent. And the tumah spreads in that whole space and affects everything in the space. So let's look at the Mishnah in Ohalot Gimel Zion 3:7. Tefach al rum tefach miruba. If you have a 1 handbreadth cubed space, now a handbreadth is the size of a man's fist, right? From the thumb to the pinky, right? And it's a handbreadth by handbreadth by handbreadth. So a handbreadth cubed. That amount of space may via tatoma. It actually allows toma to fill it up completely. So if you had, I don't know, an olive's worth of a corpse, sorry to be gross or graphic, an olive's worth of a corpse in that area, anything else in that area, the toma would affect it as well, meaning it spreads throughout that space. And also that amount of space, a handbreadth cubed, the chotzitz bifnei hatama. It also acts as a screen against impurity, meaning it somehow keeps it from breaking through enclosures. Let's see what we mean. Ketzad, how does it work? Biv shehu kamur tachar bayit. If you had a gutter that was arched underneath a home. Now, you have to imagine that there must be some opening to the home where the water goes through from the home into the gutter to get out. But let's imagine that that opening is locked for right now, okay, for our purposes. And if that if that gutter, okay, has yesh bo potech tefach, if it has a handbreadth of space in it, v'yesh b'yitziato potech tefach, and in the exit that it has, the opening that it has to the outdoors, not to the house, to the outdoors, also has a handbreadth of space. Tum'ah betocho, the tum'ah remains, I should say, remains in the gutter, but also probably leaves the gutter through its outside. But the point is, habayit tahor. It doesn't break through into the house. That's the point, right? It doesn't break through, it doesn't pop the balloon, it doesn't break through out of the house, into the house, excuse me. And tum'ah babayit, if the source of tum'ah was in the house rather than in this gutter, Masha betocho tahor. What's in the gutter remains pure, meaning the impurity doesn't get through and pop through to the gutter. Why? Shederech hatum'ah latzeit ve'ein darka lihikanes. Because here's a principle which almost sounds like a physical principle of impurity. It leaves spaces, it doesn't enter spaces, meaning it's not going to go from the bigger space of the house trying to get into a smaller space of the gutter, right? Now, you're going to say to me, but I thought that the opening between the gutter and the house is shut. We're not going to deal with that right now. But what we're going to notice is that in this Mishnah, it really seems like there are physical properties, right? It's like, think about it as a gush of water. Think about it as air in a balloon, right? When does it pop? When does it not? However, there are other places in Sifrut Tanait, in Tanaitic literature, where it does not seem like what we're talking about is something that is purely a physical force that exists outside of us, but actually sounds like it's somewhat mind dependent. It's somewhat dependent on our intention, on our way of thinking about it, which in some ways makes it more symbolic or theoretical than actually physical. And I'll give you a core example. When you look in the Mishnah in Ohalot in 7:3, it's funny, we were just looking at 3:7 and now we're going 7:3. You have the following example, and let me just set it up for you. If you have a house in which there is a dead human body, taking the body out of that house, first of all, the whole house is tamei. But my question is, what if you have several different openings to the house and right now they're all closed? What is the deal with, let's say, those openings that are closed currently, right? Think of it like window panes or doorways, have a little bit of an overhang coming on the outside of them, okay? Is what's under the overhang considered tamei or not? So turns out if you don't know where you are taking the body out of, all of those doors are considered tamei, and the overhang near them, what's underneath, is tamei. But if you do know which door it's going to go out of, only that area is going to be tamei, even if the door is not open yet, right? That area is going to be tamei, and all the other doors are not, and their archway, meaning their archways are not going to be tamei or their overhangs or what's under them. So let's look at the Mishnah. First, it starts with something that sounds very physical. Hamet babayit. There's a dead human being in a home. Ubo ptachin harbe. And there are many doorways, a number of doorways out of the home. Kulan tmeim, right? They're all tamei. We're assuming they're closed. And what we mean is really the overhang near them affects tum'ah underneath them. Niftach echad mehen. If one of them was opened, hu tamei v'kulan tehorim. That one's tamei, and all the other ones are ritually pure. So here I could still say the physical root. I could still say, oh, good, the tumah's like going out the door. It's going out this door, and it's not going out those doors. But you can't say that about the next line. Chashav lahotzio be'echad mehen. If a person just made the decision, I'm going to take the dead body out door A, door's still closed. O bechalon, or window A, shehu arba'at tvachim, which is at least 4 by 4 handbreadths because it has to be big enough to fit a body through. Hitzil al kol ptachim. The rest of the entrances, their overhangs do not make things tamei. Wait. I thought Tum'ah was a physical force. Why does it matter if I've decided to take the body out through one exit? Don't I have to open the door in order for the Tum'ah to go out? Don't I have? Nope. I have to just think it. What's happening here is there is almost like a symbolic, created human thought, intention dimension which is a little bit, I'm going to say, because I think that's something that we're, you know, more familiar with. We're basically saying it's as if you've taken it, you've opened that door, but I haven't opened that door. So it's not just a physical force, Tuma. There's something cognitive here, right? So it's kind of an interesting thing. And I want to say that one has to wonder, what does it mean to try to look at Tum'ah as both a physical force, but also a physical force that sometimes we actually control in the way that we think and make decisions, which kind of means it's a physical force, but it doesn't have its own mind, right? Like it's not fully independent of the way people think. And I want to note that Professor Vera Noam, who really wrote the article and then the book on this topic, she points out that when you look in the Torah, certainly most of the impression that you get about Tumah and Tara is that Tum'ah, ritual impurity, is like a real thing, like water, like air. It has, laws of physics that impact it, you know? So, for example, when you look in Vayikra chapter 11, right? And this is more like conducting electricity. B'chiyipol minivlatam, if a carcass of an animal that's tameh falls, or it's a carcass, so it's meaning it's a non-slaughtered carcass. If it falls al kol zera zarua, on any seed grain, asher yizareh, excuse me, that's, going to be planted, tahor, still pure, the seed. But v'chiyutan mayim al zera, but if water was put on the seed, v'nafal minivlatam alav, and a carcass falls on it, meaning a non-slaughtered animal, tamehu lachem, then it is tameh. Meaning, same way, only certain materials conduct electricity, only certain materials conduct tumah, meaning something that's wet conducts tumah, something that's not doesn't conduct tumah. In this example, when we're talking about uh, when we're talking about food becoming tameh from animal carcasses, sounds very physical. But when you look at the example of, let's say, a house that has tzara'at, you see one of the very few examples of what we would call nominalism, meaning your declaration creates the tumah. What do we mean by that? Well, in Vayikra Yudalid, Vayikra 14, the Kohen has to come see the house that is leprous. And before the Kohen goes in and looks, Vitziva Kohen, the Kohen should tell everyone, Upinu et habayit, they should clear the house. B'terem yavo Kohen lirot et hanega, before that Kohen comes in to examine what's going on. Why? V'lo yitma kol asher b'bayit, because we don't want everything in the house to become tameh. If the house is determined to be tameh, when we're talking about a house that has tsarat, everything in it becomes tameh. So what do? We say, take everything out, and then ve'achar ken yavo kohen lirot et habayit. Let the kohen come and see the house. Now, I have a simple question. If the kohen comes and says, I determined that the house is tameh, isn't everything you took out of the house tameh also? Because it's been in that house the whole time. So maybe you might say, oh, well, maybe it only became leprous right when the Kohen saw it. Or maybe what we're talking about is the declaration of the Kohen. Without the declaration of the Kohen, it doesn't have an independent standing of being Tameh, right? Similar to how when the rabbis declared the new moon, the declaration of the new moon, they needed to say it in order for it to be, right? So there's something here, a little bit of a push and pull between, is this in our capacity in terms of our intention and the way we say things and what we declare and what law creates, or is this a force out there that we don't really control? Now, I want to say that the polemics about this are really important because in the ancient world, when people thought about impurity, they thought about a demonic force that was independent of any deity, that was independent of all human beings, that could wreak havoc on the world. Okay? And we definitely want to stay away from that because we don't think there are demonic forces that are independent of God, that God can't control. And so part of the polemic or part of the difference between the way Tum'ah and Tara is spoken about in the Torah is it's not just a physical force that can do anything and everything on its own. There are ways in which we actually control it. And I want us to look at Psikta Rav Kahana, which is not Tanaitic. Psikta Rav Kahana is, fourth to seventh century. I want us to look at this interaction that the Psikta gives us between Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai and someone who's not Jewish about the red heifer, about the paraduma, which tries to rid us of ritual impurity that we get through confronting a corpse, right? Through confronting death. Goy Echad sha'al et Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai. A non-Jew asked Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, Amarle, he says, Elaine Milin da'atun avdin, the stuff that you people do with this para aduma, with this red heifer, near in kamin kshafin. It looks like witchcraft. It just looks like sorcery that you're doing. Maybe in para v'shochtein you bring a cow and you slaughter it, v'sorfinota, and then you burn it, v'kotshinota, and you grind it, v'notlinet efara, and you take its ashes, v'achad mikem mitamei lemeit. If one of you is impure, ritually impure by contact with the dead, umazin alav shtaim shalosh tipin. You pour a few drops on them, you throw a few drops on them, and you say, Teharta, here you are now pure, right? Looks like witchcraft. This whole thing, it's like sorcery to get rid of some demonic force. So Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai is now in a bind. How's he supposed to explain this, right? So he does explain it in some sort of physical way, but I think he moves away from sorcery, witchcraft, to something that's a little more, I would say, like medicine, rational, science, but still thinking of Tum'ah as a force. Amar lo, so Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, in trying to explain to this person, what are we talking about? What are we doing with the red heifer? He says, Lo nichnesa ruch tzazit ba'oto ha'ish miyamav. Have you ever had an epileptic seizure? Amar lo lav, he said, no. Amar lo, he says, well, v'lo ra'ita acher shenichnesa bo ruch tzazit. Have you seen anybody who's ever had that? Amar lo hein, he says, sure. He says, Uma tamosin. So what do you do for them? And presumably we're talking about medicine here, right? Amarlo, he says, well, mivi'ini karin, we bring roots, like herbal roots, ume'ashnin tachtav, and we, smoke them under the person, u marbitzim aleha mayim, and we throw water on it, vihi borachat, and that, epileptic ruach, spirit leaves. Okay. And so Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, and I'm saying I think they think this is science as opposed to witchcraft because he's trying to get away from witchcraft, right? Like I don't think it's an exorcism as much as it's this is our remedy. Amar lo, so Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai says, hello, v'lo yishma'u oznecha ma shepicha medaber. Didn't you hear what you just said to me? Kach haruach hazeh ruach tum'ahi. That's what tum'ah is also, right? And then he gives a source from Zechariah. But the point is, he's saying to him, yeah, it's a physical thing. Just like if you have that physical ailment of X, you do something to get rid of it, it's a physical thing. But Bekivan Yatsa, when that non-Jewish person left, Amrulo Talmidav, Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai's students turned to him and said, really? Rebbe, our teacher, Lazed Dachita Bekaneh, you pushed this person off with a reed, meaning you gave him kind of like a soft explanation doesn't really stand under scrutiny. Lanu mata mishiv. How are you going to answer us? Amar lahem. So he says to them, Chayechem, I swear on your lives, lo hamet mitamei. It's not that the dead actually causes tumah. Velo hamayim mitaharim, and it's not that the waters actually purify. El gzerato shel Kadosh Baruch Hu. This is God's decree. That's it. Don't think of it as a physical force. And by the way, here it's not just our cognition, it's God's decision. This is what it is. It's not a physical force. Don't think of it as something physical. Think of it as something metaphysical, right? So this is another part of the polemic that's basically saying we do not want it to be a force that moves and grooves as some sort of demon. And we don't even want it to be a force that is just part of nature, but actually it has to be something that is created by God. Now, you might say Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai doth protest too much because in both the Torah and in Tannaitic literature, you do have a physical sense of this is like a force, it's like water, it's like air, it's like electricity, right? Like it's a force. But I think the polemic does show you something that we're worried about, meaning that it would be independent of God, right? And we don't want it to be independent of God. Now, this brings into question that, case of ruach tzazit, that case of, trying to have some remedy for epilepsy, because what do you mean? Our laws of nature, those are not independent of God. So big question marks here. But at the very least, what we see is that there is a concern with Tum'ah being perceived as some sort of demonic force or some sort of independent force. And so, Dr. Vered Nauman, I gave you a link to the article for anybody who wants to go down this rabbit hole. She basically says, when I look at Tannaitic literature, I'm not going to deal with Amoraic literature today, but when you look at Tannaitic literature, she says the natural, imminent, meaning like it really is here and exists, conception of impurity, of Tum'ah, is at the foundation of the halachic system as a whole. And it does determine the basic definitions of Tum'ah. But, and I'm skipping, the nominalistic elements, meaning the elements that relate to the system creating reality as opposed to uh, reflecting reality, or my intention creating reality, which now gets us into the realm of more symbolic or metaphysical or just cognitive, right? But it's not real that I can touch out there, because those are really footnotes that are added on, right? The main is that it's a real force, but then you have the footnotes. So she gives a few examples, okay? So she says, for example, impurity flows to all the openings, right? That was the example of the dead body in the house, meaning it's physical. It flows to all the openings, like water, like air, right? That's a basic statement of concrete, imminent, like it exists right here, impurity. True, human intention is likely to divert it to a particular opening, meaning when I say to myself, when I think to myself, oh, I'm going to use that opening, I'm going to use that door, even if it's not open yet. My intention does have an impact, but she says this is a secondary option that's grafted onto the realistic original situation. Okay. Now, I want to say, let me see if I can give you like another easy example. An easy example. So you have the easy example. I'm going to leave that as our basic example. But I do want us to note, when we look back at biblical times, so Dr. Yechezkel Kaufman, who was a Bible scholar, he gives us kind of a picture of, what is Tum'ah, what is impurity in the ancient world. And he says the battle of good and evil. Paganism regards impurity or demonic evil as an autonomous, baleful realm, as primary as the holy and the good, right? There's the holy and the good on one side, and there's the demonic and the evil on the other. And it is as independent. Death, disease, darkness, and the host of evil spirits who seek to destroy gods and men, thinking pagan, right, are the domain of the unclean. The eternal struggle between these two realms is vividly reflected in the cult. Now, what we're doing in Torah and in Chazal is something different, which is basically saying, yeah, there's a physicality to it. Sure, 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 sure. but it's not a physicality that exists completely independently. It doesn't exist independent of God. It doesn't exist independent of human beings. This is not some demonic force and spirit. It's actually something more like water, air, electricity, right? Where it's not demonic, right? It's not something that we can't fully control, but it goes a step further, which is there is a role for both divine fiat, God saying, this is what it is. I am creating reality. I'm not telling you what's reflecting reality. I'm creating it by telling you to keep this and to think this way. And also that human beings' thoughts and our intentions matter in creating the reality of impurity, right? Meaning we're just moving beyond that basic sense of just being acted upon into a sense of actually Jewish law, God's command, our intentions and cognition actually shaping how we see the world, shaping a reality. In some ways, it's kind of um, the ultimate attempt to combine some sense that there are actually truly physical forces in the world that are real, but also that bechira chofshit, that also that our choices are also real and create worlds. And that whole sense is actually, I think, in a certain way, what Torah is trying to bring through monotheism and through an idea that people can and should make choice, can and should make distinctions, can and should have intention, um, and to be able to create things and not just look at the world around us. Because after all, we don't just have nature as God's creation. We also have revelation as an intention, as an intervention in that creation. So there is more to the world than simply what we see. There is more to the world than simply what we see. Thanks for learning with me, everybody. Hope this was a nice foray for you into Tum'ah and its kind of questions about Halakha in general.